The air in courtroom 3B was stale, tasting of old paper, cheap disinfectant, and the low-grade fear that Judge Alistair Albright cultivated like a prize-winning orchid. It was his domain, this sterile box of polished wood and beige walls, and every soul who entered it was a trespasser until proven otherwise. His authority was a physical weight, pressing down from the elevated bench, silencing whispers and straightening spines. Today, that weight was directed at the men standing before him, a men who seemed entirely unimpressed by it. Martin Kelly stood at the defendant's podium, his posture relaxed but not disrespectful. He was there for a disputed parking ticket, a bureaucratic absurdity that had somehow escalated to a mandatory court appearance. He wore a simple tweed jacket over a pressed blue shirt, his graying hair was neatly combed, and his hands rested calmly on the worn wood in front of him. He looked like a history professor or a retired librarian, utterly unremarkable except for two details, a slight, almost imperceptible limp, and the small, star-shaped metal pin to his left lapel, suspended from a pale blue, star-spangled ribbon. Judge Albright's eyes, small and dark like a boar's, were fixed on that single point of color. He had already dismissed 2 cases with theatrical contempt and tongue-lashed a young, nervous lawyer into a state of near tears. He was warmed up, and he had found his next target. The judge leaned forward, his black robes rustling. His voice was a low, grating sound, designed to carry and intimidate. "Mr. Kelly," he began, letting the name hang in the air like an accusation. "We are here to discuss your flagrant disregard for Municipal Code 2-17B. A fire hydrant, I believe." "Yes, Your Honor." Martin Kelly's voice was even, calm. The signage was obscured. "I have photographs." Albright waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that brushed away due process as if it were a fly. "I will see your photographs when I ask for them. Before we proceed, however, I find myself distracted." He pointed a thick finger at Kelly's chest. "By that thing on your jacket." A murmur, quickly suppressed, rippled through the gallery. Prosecutor Ben Carter, seated at the prosecution table, shifted in his chair. He'd seen Albright on a tear before. It was never pretty. He felt a familiar knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. He glanced at Kelly, expecting to see a flicker of fear, of anger, of anything. He saw nothing but placid resolve. "It is a military decoration, Your Honor," Kelly stated simply. There was no pride in his voice, no defensiveness. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sky was blue. "A military decoration," Albright repeated, savoring the words as if they were distasteful. "I see. And you felt it was appropriate to wear this decoration to a court of law. Are you trying to influence the proceedings, Mr. Kelly? Curry favor with some misplaced appeal to patriotism?" The accusation was absurd, a clear sign that the judge was not interested in the parking ticket. He was interested in power, in the simple, brutal act of making a man smaller than himself. Kelly's gaze did not waver. "I wear it always, Your Honor. In remembrance." "In remembrance," the judge sneered. The sound was ugly in the quiet room. "How very noble. But this is not a memorial service. This is my courtroom. In my courtroom, the only symbols of authority that matter are the flag behind me and the robe I am wearing. Everything else is a distraction. Everything else is contempt." The word hung in the air. Contempt. It was Albright's favorite weapon. He used it to crush dissent, to punish perceived slights, to enforce his absolute dominion over the room. He was a petty king in a small, windowless kingdom, and Martin Kelly had just brought in a foreign flag. Ben Carter felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He had seen this play out a dozen times. The judge would push and push until his victim either broke down or lashed out, and then he would bring the gavel down, literally and figuratively. But there was something different about the man in the tweed jacket. He wasn't cowering. He wasn't puffing up his chest. He was just there. A rock in the stream of the judge's vitriol. The peer group, the collection of citizens waiting for their own turn in the grinder, were a study in silent complicity. They stared at their shoes, at the clock on the wall, anywhere but at Martin Kelly. They didn't want to get drawn in. They just wanted to pay their fine or contest their ticket and get out of the stale, oppressive air of courtroom 3B. Kelly was on his own, an outsider defined not by his background, but by the judge's sudden, vicious focus. Whispers started to circulate in the back rows, speculation about who this man was, why he was being so stubborn, why he didn't just take the pin off and get it over with. Albright leaned back, a cruel smile touching his lips. He was enjoying this. He was in control. So, Mr. Kelly, this remembrance of yours. What great campaign did you serve in that requires such a constant, public display? Let me guess. Grenada. Panama. Some brief, glorious little war where you earned a medal for showing up. The insult was designed to provoke, to strip the honor from the service. Ben Carter winced. He had a cousin who'd served in Panama. He knew the cost. The judge's ignorance was as profound as his arrogance. He looked again at the medal on Kelly's lapel. It was not a campaign ribbon. It was something more. The shape, the pale blue, star-dusted ribbon, it was familiar, but from where? He had a vague recollection from a dusty textbook at the academy, a display case at a military museum. It was something rare. Martin Kelly's expression remained unchanged, but a new stillness came over him. It was the stillness of a man who had seen true conflict and found the judge's verbal assault to be a minor, almost trivial, annoyance. My service record is not relevant to a parking violation, Your Honor. It is relevant to me. Albright's voice boomed, the carefully modulated intimidation giving way to raw anger. He slammed his hand on the bench, not with the gavel, but with his open palm. The sound cracked through the room. I am the arbiter of what is and is not relevant in this court. Your refusal to answer constitutes contempt. Your wearing of that bauble, in an attempt to sway this court constitutes contempt. Your very attitude, Mr. Kelly, borders on contempt. The judge's face was turning a blotchy red. He was losing the cool, detached demeanor of a jurist and revealing the furious little man beneath the robes. He was enraged that his usual tactics weren't working. Kelly wasn't flinching. He wasn't apologizing. He was simply enduring, and his endurance was a quiet, powerful act of defiance. It was a mirror held up to the judge's bullying, and Albright did not like the reflection. He decided to escalate, to turn the screw until the man finally broke. We will have order. And we will have respect. Mr. Kelly, I am giving you a direct order. Remove that medal. Now. The room went dead silent. This was no longer about a parking ticket. It was a raw contest of wills, a public stripping of dignity. The audience was no longer indifferent. They were watching, rapt, a collective breath held in the stale air. They were about to witness a man be humiliated, and a part of them, a dark, shameful part, was eager to see it. It meant the judge's wrath was not directed at them. Ben Carter's mind was racing. The medal. He had to know what it was. While Albright postured on the bench, puffing himself up for the final blow, Carter discreetly slid his phone from his pocket, keeping it below the level of the table. His fingers flew across the screen, typing in a description. U.S. Military Medal Pale Blue Ribbon White Stars Star-Shaped. The search results loaded instantly. His eyes widened. His breath hitched. It was impossible. He clicked on the first link, a government page, and a high-resolution image filled his screen. There it was. The Medal of Honor. A wave of nausea and fury washed over him. He felt sick. The highest award for valor in action. An honor bestowed upon so few, for acts of such incredible bravery that they defied description. And Alastair Albright, a man whose greatest battle was fighting traffic on his way to the courthouse, had just called it a thing, a bauble. He looked up from his phone. He saw Martin Kelly, a Medal of Honor recipient, being publicly berated and ordered to remove the symbol of his unimaginable sacrifice over a $25 parking ticket. He saw Judge Albright, drunk on his own minor power, completely oblivious to the fact that he was attempting to humiliate a living legend, a national hero. Ben knew he had to do something. This was not just an injustice, it was a sacrilege. Protocol, procedure, his own career, none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was the profound, stomach-turning wrongness of what was happening in courtroom 3B. He had to make a call. Albright, meanwhile, was pressing his attack. Did you hear me, Mr. Kelly? I gave you a lawful order. Remove it. Or I will have the bailiff remove it for you, and I will hold you in contempt for a period of no less than 30 days. The threat was real. 30 days in a county jail, all for refusing to remove a medal. Martin Kelly looked from the judge to the bailiff, a portly man who looked deeply uncomfortable with the prospect of laying a hand on him. Then he looked at the American flag standing in the corner behind the judge's bench. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had not sought this confrontation. He had come to court to be a citizen, to argue his case with facts and evidence. But the judge had made it about something else entirely. He had made it about the medal. And the medal was not just his. It belonged to the men who hadn't come home. It was a trust. It was a promise. It was a piece of their memory that he carried for them. To remove it on the order of a petty tyrant like Albright would be to break that trust. It would be a betrayal. "No, Your Honor," Kelly said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the courtroom. It was a voice forged in crisis, stripped of all unnecessary emotion, leaving only the hard, dense core of conviction. "I will not." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Open defiance. No one defied Judge Albright. Ben Carter, watching from his table, felt a surge of admiration. He had already found the number he was looking for in his contacts. It was a long shot, a number he'd gotten at a charity dinner and never dreamed of using. He pressed send under the table. Albright's face contorted into a mask of pure fury. The last vestiges of judicial temperament vanished. "That's it," he roared, finally reaching for his gavel. "Bailiff, take this man into custody." Contempt of court. The bailiff took a hesitant step forward. But before he could reach the podium, a voice cut through the tension. It was Ben Carter, standing now, his phone still in his hand. "Your Honor, I would ask the court for a brief recess. Perhaps 5 minutes." Albright turned his wrath on the prosecutor. "You will sit down, Mr. Carter. This does not concern you. This man has defied a direct order." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Carter said, his own voice shaking slightly but holding firm, "I believe it concerns every citizen in this room. And I believe that in approximately 4 minutes, it is going to concern you a great deal more." The statement was so audacious, so completely out of character for the usually mild-mannered prosecutor, that it stunned Albright into a moment of silence. What could Carter possibly mean? Was it a threat? An appeal to a higher court? It didn't matter. Albright's ego was too wounded to back down now. "Your theatrics are noted, Mr. Carter. And they will be dealt with later." "Bailiff, proceed," he commanded. But as the bailiff reached for Kelly's arm, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a man who seemed to have been carved from granite. He was tall, ramrod straight, and wore the immaculate Class A uniform of a United States Army general, his chest a constellation of ribbons and medals. On his shoulders were 4 silver stars. It was General James Ironclad Thompson, commander of the nearby Fort Devereaux and one of a handful of the most powerful military leaders in the country. Behind him, fanning out into the hallway, were uniformed service members. Soldiers in their army greens, Marines in their blues, airmen and sailors in their respective dress uniforms. They were not an honor guard, they were a presence. They flowed into the courtroom, not with a clatter, but with the quiet, disciplined efficiency of a combat unit securing a position. They did not take seats. They lined the walls, standing at a perfect, unnerving parade rest, their gazes locked on the judge's bench. 10, 20, 30, then 50 of them. They filled every available space along the periphery, a silent, living wall of military honor. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The stale air of petty tyranny was replaced by the crisp, charged ozone of real authority. The public in the gallery shrank in their seats. The bailiff froze, his hand hovering inches from Kelly's arm, and then slowly, cautiously, retreated to his post by the wall. Judge Albright stared, his mouth hanging slightly open. His face, which had been a blotchy red, was now draining of all color, leaving a pasty, sickly white. He looked from the 4-star general to the silent ranks of soldiers and back again, his mind unable to process what was happening. This was his courtroom. His kingdom. And it had just been invaded. General Thompson strode down the center aisle, his footsteps precise and silent on the worn linoleum. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at the gallery. His eyes were fixed on one man, He stopped beside the prosecutor's table. Ben Carter, who was still standing, looked as if a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He gave the general a short, respectful nod. Thompson returned the nod, a flicker of gratitude in his otherwise stern expression. Then, he turned and faced Martin Kelly. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. The quiet hero in the tweed jacket and the four-star general in his decorated uniform. An unspoken history passed between them, a shared understanding of things people like Judge Albright could never comprehend. Then, in an act that sent a shockwave through the courtroom, General Thompson, a man who commanded divisions, who had the ear of presidents, snapped to the sharpest, most precise position of attention that Courtroom 3B had ever seen. He raised his hand in a salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was a salute of profound, almost reverent respect, from one warrior to another. Martin, the general's voice was a low rumble, but it carried the easy command of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "It's good to see you, my friend. I apologize for the intrusion. I was informed there was a situation here that required my immediate attention." Martin Kelly returned the gesture with a faint, weary smile. "Jim. You didn't have to come all this way." "The hell I didn't," Thompson said, dropping his salute but remaining at attention. He then turned his gaze, cold and hard as chipped flint, upon the men on the bench. Judge Albright. The judge flinched as if he'd been struck. He fumbled with his gavel, his hands trembling. The instrument of his power now seemed like a child's toy. "General. I don't understand. What is the meaning of this? This is a court of law." "I am well aware of what this is, Judge," Thompson said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming more dangerous. "The question is, do you?" "I received a call from Prosecutor Carter a few minutes ago. He informed me that a decorated veteran was being held in contempt of your court. He informed me that you had ordered this veteran to remove his service decoration." It's a distraction. It is against decorum." Albright stammered, his defense sounding weak and pathetic even to his own ears. "Decorum," General Thompson repeated the word as if it were a foreign object in his mouth. He took a step closer to the bench, his polished shoes making no sound. The 50 service members lining the walls seemed to collectively straighten, a silent, unified show of support for their commander. "Let me tell you about decorum, Judge. Let me tell you about that bauble you so contemptuously dismissed." He pointed, not at Kelly, but at the medal itself. "That is the Medal of Honor. Our nation's highest and most prestigious personal military decoration. It is awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." He paused, letting the official words sink in. The jury box, which had been a collection of bored and intimidated faces, was now a gallery of wide-eyed, stunned individuals. They stared at Martin Kelly as if seeing him for the first time. The unassuming man with the limp was not just a defendant in a parking case. He was a hero. "This man," Thompson continued, his voice rising with a controlled, righteous anger, "this quiet, unassuming citizen you have been harassing and threatening for the last 30 minutes, is Sergeant Major Martin Kelly, United States Army Rangers, retired. He is not just a veteran, Judge. He is one of the most decorated soldiers of the modern era. And he is one of fewer than 70 living recipients of that medal." Albright looked as if he was going to be physically ill. His face was slick with sweat. He was no longer a king on a throne, he was a fool in a black robe, exposed and shamed in front of his entire court. General Thompson was not finished. He was a predator who had his prey cornered, and he was going to dismantle him piece by piece. You questioned his service. You mocked his remembrance. You ordered him to remove a medal that was bestowed upon him by the President of the United States on behalf of a grateful nation. A medal he earned on a ridge in Afghanistan, where he, despite being wounded twice, single-handedly held off an enemy assault, saving the lives of his entire platoon after his commanding officer was killed. The general's voice now held a raw, personal fury. He wears that medal, Judge, not for his own vanity, but for the 8 men who died on that ridge beside him. He wears it for them. He wears it because he promised their families he would never forget. And you, in your staggering arrogance and ignorance, called it a thing. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the frantic, panicked breathing of Judge Alistair Albright. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but no words came out. What could he say? How could he possibly defend the indefensible? General Thompson took another step forward, resting his hands on the bar that separated the court from the gallery. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his roars. I have been on the phone for the entire drive over here, Judge. I spoke with Senator Michelson, who chairs the Armed Services Committee. I spoke with the governor. And I spoke with the chief of the state's Judicial Review Board. They are all, shall we say, extraordinarily interested in today's proceedings. They are particularly interested in a judge who seems to believe that his personal authority outweighs the honor of a Medal of Honor recipient. The implication was crystal clear. It was not a threat, it was a statement of fact. Albright's career was over. He had picked a fight with the wrong man, and in doing so, had brought the full, righteous weight of the United States military and its political allies down upon his own head. He had built his kingdom on fear, and now a greater power had arrived and casually demolished it. The general straightened up, his duty done. He turned his back on the judge, a final, damning gesture of dismissal. He walked back to Martin Kelly. Sergeant Major, he said, his voice now gentle. Your case is dismissed. I've spoken with the city manager. They are dropping the ticket and issuing a formal apology. He then turned to the 50 silent service members who still lined the walls. Escort, he commanded. In perfect unison, the 50 men and women snapped to attention. They formed two lines, creating a clear aisle from the defendant's podium to the courtroom doors. It was a gauntlet of honor, a spontaneous, overwhelming display of respect. Martin Kelly looked at the general, at the rows of young, proud faces, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. It was a deep, bone-weary gratitude. He nodded slowly. Thank you, Jim. It is we who thank you, Martin, the general replied, placing a hand on Kelly's shoulder. As Kelly began to walk, his limp more pronounced now, the general at his side, another sound filled the courtroom. It started with one person in the jury box, a middle-aged woman with tears in her eyes, who pushed her chair back and stood up. Then another juror stood, and another. The public in the gallery, no longer afraid, rose to their feet. The young lawyer Albright had berated earlier, the court stenographer, even the bailiff, they all stood. It was a spontaneous, silent standing ovation, an apology, and a tribute all in one. The peer group, once complicit in their silence, had shifted completely. Their scorn, or rather their fearful indifference, had transformed into awe. They were not just looking at a man who had stood up to a bully, they were looking at a man who embodied a level of courage they could barely imagine. The whispers that had circulated earlier, full of speculation and judgment, were replaced by a hushed reverence. They were witnesses to a moment of profound moral correction, and they were now part of it. Just before he reached the doors, one of the young Marines in the honor guard, a lance corporal no older than 20, broke protocol. He took a half-step forward, his eyes locked on Kelly. It's an honor, Sergeant Major, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Kelly paused, looked the young man in the eye, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement from one generation of warrior to another. It was the olive branch, the final symbol of the peer group's total acceptance and reverence. Kelly and Thompson walked through the doors and were gone. The service members remained in their positions, a silent, imposing guard, their eyes still fixed on the bench. They were not leaving until the chapter was fully closed. Left behind in the center of the room was Judge Alastair Albright. He sat alone at his high bench, small and pathetic in his black robes. The symbols of his authority, the gavel, the raised platform, the flag behind him, were now hollow props on an empty stage. He looked out at the sea of standing, silent, accusing faces. His jury, his public, his court staff. They were all staring at him, and for the first time, they were not afraid. They were seeing him for what he truly was, a hollow man, a bully whose power was an illusion, now shattered beyond repair. Slowly, as if the weight of his disgrace was a physical burden, he picked up his gavel. He held it for a moment, then let it fall from his trembling fingers. It clattered onto the bench with a weak, insignificant sound. It was then that Martin Kelly's final words seemed to echo in the silent room. He hadn't said them, not out loud, but the sentiment was clear in his every action, in his unbreakable resilience. Respect isn't commanded by a gavel, it's earned through sacrifice. The silent soldiers and marines and airmen and sailors stood their ground, a living testament to that truth. They waited, their presence a promise that justice would be served. Judge Albright looked at the gauntlet of uniforms, at the contempt in the eyes of his jury, and he knew his reign was over. His fall from grace was not just swift, it was absolute and public, a direct result of his own venomous pride. Outside, on the courthouse steps, a small crowd of reporters had already gathered, drawn by the sudden, dramatic arrival of a four-star general and his entourage. General Thompson shielded Martin Kelly from the cameras, guiding him toward a waiting staff car. "I'll take you home, Martin," he said quietly. Kelly nodded, the weariness of the day finally settling on him. He had not wanted this attention. He never did. He just wanted to live a quiet life, to honor his promises, to manage the ghosts that still walked with him. But sometimes, the world demanded a reminder of what true strength looked like. Today, he had provided that reminder. As the car pulled away, he looked back at the courthouse, a bland monument to a justice that was sometimes blind not to prejudice, but to honor. He felt a profound sadness for Judge Albright, not of pity, but of a weary understanding of the man's deep-seated insecurity. A man who needed to tear others down to feel tall was the smallest man of all. The new order had been established. In the sterile confines of Courtroom 3B, a new precedent had been set. It was not a legal precedent, but a moral one. The community that had witnessed the event would tell the story for years to come, the day a quiet veteran faced down a tyrant, not with anger, but with the unassailable power of his own quiet dignity. The day 50 uniformed service members invaded a courtroom not with weapons, but with respect. The day Judge Albright learned that some men carry an authority that cannot be granted by a governor or stripped away by a gavel. Back in the courtroom, the crowd began to disperse, talking in hushed, excited tones. The service members remained. They would wait until the bailiff formally adjourned the session, until the judge, stripped of all his power, was forced to walk past them. They would be the last thing he saw as he left his courtroom for the final time. It was a final, silent, and devastating act of justice. Albright, eventually, had no choice but to rise. He gathered his papers with fumbling hands, not looking at anyone, his face a mask of gray despair. He walked down from his bench, his robes seeming to swallow him, and as he passed between the two lines of ramrod-straight military personnel, their collective, silent judgment was the heaviest sentence he would ever receive. His lowly new reality was just beginning, a life of obscurity, forever haunted by the memory of the day he tried to humiliate a hero and ended up destroying himself. His public life was over. The quiet professional had won.